We absolutely love doing these type of shows for a Friday on a bye week. It is a what if edition of Orange and Blue today. Cecil Lammy, Andrew Mason, and a big one, Mace, because what if, yes, the Denver Broncos make the playoffs? Before we get into the who's and what's and whys and all that, just think about that, man, from the way this season started to go into the postseason.
Yeah, and make no mistake, we're still talking about something that is a relative long shot as this season goes. The chances of being a playoff team if you were 2-6 are infinitesimal. At 3-5, it's still relatively remote, especially when you start looking around the AFC. I mean, you look at the standings and say, okay, well, great. At 3-5, they are they're just a game and a half back heading into week 9, their bye week of the last spot. But yeah, the fact that we're having this conversation says a lot about what this team has done the last couple of weeks and what this defense has done as well, because if this defense is indeed fully revived in the last couple of weeks or not a fluke, Broncos have a success equation, even though it may not involve all that much from the quarterback.
Right, and we're going to get to that. We just watched yesterday's show, of course, about Russell Wilson. We'll get to that in just a little bit, but because you start with defense, if the Broncos make the playoffs, what if? Mm-hmm. What does it mean for Vance Joseph? A guy, again, I'll fully admit, I was the guy saying after Miami, he's gone. He's not gone. He's here. And not only that, Mace, the defense is thriving.
You weren't just saying you wanted him gone. You were
saying he was gone.
He was gone repeatedly.
Good teams fire Vance Joseph after a 70 game. But I digress. He's here, and if they make the postseason, does he stay here?
Unless somebody poaches him to be their head coach, and I know that's something that some of y'all watching this show may think, "Oh, no way, Vance Joseph. There's no way someone would hire him." Well, I think if you look at an in-season turnaround, if the Broncos are a playoff team and the defense keeps playing like this, there's going to be a lot of weight given to how you took a defense that had literally the worst single game performance for any NFL team defense in nearly 57 years, took that and starting with just in 5 weeks, turned it into a defense that dominated Kansas City and kept them from scoring a touchdown in last Sunday's game. Now, certainly personnel did help, right? Baron Browning didn't play against Miami. He played against Kansas City. Justin Simmons didn't play against Miami. He played against Kansas City. Josie Jewell was hurt early against Miami. He played against Kansas City. But there were also some buttons that Vance Joseph pushed both tactically and in terms of lineup changes that have made a big difference, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. And teams are looking for coaches who can adapt and that can change on the fly and that can connect with their players and motivate them. And to his credit, Vance Joseph so far this season has shown he's all three of those.
Right. A guy that hasn't lost the belief of his players in that locker room. And Mace, I'll say something that may sound crazy and ridiculous, but you bring up the Chiefs game and Kansas City's going to the playoffs. We know this. But what if they get to the postseason and people steal what Denver did, box and one, basically, to eliminate Travis Kelce? Everyone talking about the Fangio 6 and cloud coverage, and that's fine. But stopping KC, slowing down or stopping Kelce, that's what teams are focused on. And if they steal from Vance Joseph, that may not get a lot of media attention. We'll notice it, and also teams will notice it.
I think it's interesting you mentioned Vic Fangio and cloud coverage because, of course, Miami and now defensive coordinator Vic Fangio are first up to face the Kansas City Chiefs after that film was out there, and you have to wonder what Vic Fangio is going to do if he's going to borrow that. I mean, he's got his concepts, but he has never been afraid to borrow something from another school of thought if it gets results. And so we see this over and over. just like when Cincinnati in the AFC Championship game back in January of 2022, rush 3, drop 8, right? It stymied the Chiefs. They won, or they lost to the Bengals in that championship game. Bengals went on to the Super Bowl, and we saw a lot of rush 3, drop 8 from teams going forward early in the 2022 season until the Chiefs adapted. And the way you adapt to that when they drop 8 is you simply are willing to run the ball and do things on the ground to force teams to play you honest. The counter to the box and one type of thing, I think it's going to be fascinating to watch what that is for Kansas City.
Right. Can they do something to counteract that? Because teams in a copycat league are going to steal that. But what if the Denver Broncos make the playoffs? We won't belabor this because we did bring it up a little bit on yesterday's show about Russell Wilson. But what if the Broncos make the playoffs? What does that mean for Russ? And is it as simple as playoffs or bust? Playoffs, you keep Russ. Playoffs, you don't keep Russ.
It's not as simple as that. It really isn't. It matters how it's happening. Yes, they say, it's winning is the name of the game, but there are other factors involved with it. Let's start with this. How many games in the final 9 of the regular season did Russell Wilson play? Because what we see more and more as the season's going on is he's holding the ball a little bit too long. He's not taking advantage of some of the windows that are there, especially early on in the play. And if you're doing that and you're exposing yourself to greater contact in the backfield from opposing pass rushers, there's going to be an attrition. And at some point, you're going to be looking at Jarrett Stidham. And so, frankly, the starting point could be if Russell Wilson misses a game or two, how does Jarrett Stidham look in relief of Russell Wilson? And if he looks fine and things don't look any different, and he actually even runs some elements of the game plan, particularly the short to intermediate timing stuff, better than Wilson has, then that may lead the Broncos to say, okay, we're not going to go $37 million more down the road, Russell Wilson contract-wise. We're going to move on.
Yeah, and based on this conversation, I'd say this, Mace. What if the Broncos make the playoffs? What does it mean for Russell Wilson? Do they win their first game? Are they like Jacksonville last year and they have this tremendous comeback or something like that? So it's not just getting to the postseason for Russell Wilson, but it's also how does he look in getting there? And then what does he do once you're there? Because, and we've seen this before, Mike Mularkey was fired as the Titans head coach after beating the Chiefs. So it wasn't just making the playoffs. They made the playoffs. They beat the Chiefs. And then Mularkey still got fired. I know that's a coach, not a quarterback, but just don't think that making it is enough. And maybe even winning the first game isn't enough.
Yeah, with Mularkey, it was one of the great comebacks in playoff history when the Titans winning the Arrowhead Stadium. The last playoff start before Patrick Mahomes became the full-time quarterback, by the way. Mahomes had actually started the week before in Denver.
Right.
And then Alex Smith went back in the lineup, and the Chiefs blew that game at Arrowhead. Seems a long time ago. But, yeah, it's not simply about winning. It's also about, okay, do we believe this is going to get us close to where we want to go, which is to make the Super Bowl? And if the Broncos are a playoff team, is Russell Wilson, even a pilot, if not even a pilot, or is he just a passenger on the plane? Right.
Right.
That is the question that has to be asked. And I'd say this, you'll know it when you see it. Like, I think if you watched last Sunday's game against Kansas City, and you saw the game plan, which minimized Russell Wilson. He did have the 3 touchdown passes, yes. One of them was a dump off to Javonte Williams, and the other 2, hey, nice job in the red zone. But you look at the totality of the game, it wasn't a good game for Russell Wilson. There was nothing within 14 yards of the line of scrimmage, basically, in that game. Everything was either deep, and particularly either down between the hash marks or left side. There was nothing deep right. And there was everything else was behind the line of scrimmage. if you do enough other things right, you can win with that. If you do things right on defense and special teams, you get the ground game going. You can succeed with that in terms of the win-loss ledger, but that puts a distinct ceiling on what you can do. Put it this way. If that's what the Broncos can do, they might make the playoffs. They won't last very long in the playoffs.
Right. And I think all of Broncos country, you'd be over the moon to make the playoffs, but the end goal of this team is to push for a Super Bowl.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? It's funny you mentioned Mike Mularkey, because maybe a more illustrative example is also from the 2017 postseason. That's Buffalo, right? Buffalo gets back to the postseason in 2017. They're at 9-7. First playoff appearance literally this century, since 1999, right? And although I guess it was January 2000, so it's at whatever. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. But it's
who'd they
99
get there
season.
with? Who'd they get there with?
Well, they got there with Doug Flutie, and then they started Rob Johnson in 99. But in 2017, what we're talking about is they got there with Tyrod Taylor. To that shock playoff appearance that was met with such giddiness in Western New York, Buffalo's reaction was, Tyrod Taylor's not coming back for the 2018 season. We're going to draft Josh Allen.
Right.
And that's why if you get there, but Russell Wilson is only a passenger on this plane, you have to be judicious and not get caught up in the emotion of going back to the playoffs. Buffalo, to its credit, didn't. And that left them in a better spot long term. And basically, what happened in 2017 was they learned how to win, right? Mm-hmm. And then after Josh Allen went through his rookie bumps in 2018, by 2019, when Allen was at a decent level, they were right back to the playoffs, right?
Right. And ready to make a Super Bowl run.
And a legit contender, not just sneaking in, but legitimately having a chance to think in terms of Super Bowl aspirations every year. And so if you get to the offseason, if the Broncos are a playoff team, but they look at how they got there critically, and it looks a lot like the Kansas City game and the Green Bay game of the last couple of weeks, then you're asking the question, hey, can we do this with a younger cost-controlled quarterback? And yeah, you're going to have the sunk cost in Russell Wilson, but at least you're not making that sunk cost worse by adding another $37 million to it.
Right. And we look back at that Buffalo team, Mace. I remember telling my Buffalo guys, like, your first year with Sean McDermott, like you have a pass your first year. You could totally stink it up.
Yes.
And they made it with McDermott because McDermott had that locker room, and then they decided and took a step back. So also remember, if the Broncos make the playoffs this year and then do what the Bills did and get rid of their veteran and go get a young guy, prepare to have some struggles.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing. If you get back to the playoffs this year, you pull that off, then what happens is you've got some capital. Sean Payton guiding this Bronco team to the playoffs, even if it's just sneaking in there at 9-8, which I think if they are a playoff team, that's probably the most likely thing you're looking at is 9-8, because you can look right now and see Detroit likely loss, Buffalo likely loss, and there are a bunch of games of those other 7 that are coin flip type of matchups. To be a playoff team, this team's going to have to slide in there and probably get some help from a couple other teams faltering.
Right.
But if you do that, then you've got some hand, as they said on Seinfeld. You've got some credibility. You could go 9-8, be a playoff team this year. And look, and if you go young quarterback next year and go 6-11, nobody's going to bat an eye, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Because everyone's going to understand, okay, this is part of the process of growing, and then point to 2025 is the year that you really start to get things right. People be okay with that. I would say this. Buffalo in 2018 decided, hey, our bridge quarterback is going to be Nathan Peterman. No. Don't decide on that. The question then becomes, is it Jarrett Stidham back for another year? Or are you looking maybe at a Jameis Winston type who has played well for Sean Payton? And that could make that transition period maybe successful.
Right. Maybe that first year of a rookie, you are winning when the rookie's
Yeah.
ready to take over.
Mhm.
We'll get there. How do you get there? The what if scenarios continue because what if the Broncos make the playoffs? What does it mean for players that weren't traded at the trade deadline, Mace, but still could be traded before the draft, like a Justin Simmons, like a Jerry Jeudy, etc.?
Okay. Justin's really interesting because if you have a situation that restores hope to him, he may decide to just ride this thing out for the long term and be a Bronco for life. Wouldn't it all surprise me if that's the case?
I'd love it.
Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, these are more interesting examples because wide receivers are, more fungible asset-wise than a safety. Let's face it, there are a lot more wide receivers who can play at a high level than there are safeties. Safety is a complex position. You have a better chance of replacing Cortland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy than you have of replacing Justin Simmons. And by the way, if you're going quarterback in this draft, you're going to need to find ways to accumulate assets, unless you're going to sit there and wait and see who falls. If you wait who falls, you might be in the J.J. McCarthy conversation. And this is the other thing, Cease. What if you want Caleb Williams or Drake May? And then if you're a playoff team, that's well and good. But if you're a playoff team, then moving up to get one of those two quarterbacks, it's going to cost you something big, and it might cost you Pat Surtain to move up.
Right. So that's
that
a big
hurts.
thing. Which would
That
you rather
hurts.
have, Broncos country, a playoff berth, and then Pat Surtain's gone? Or
Because to get one of those top two quarterbacks, that's probably what you're going to have to do.
And that's where it starts, is Surtain.
Yeah.
I'd say Surtain in a first and a second. Like something. If it's a big move, it's gonna have to be a lot.
I mean, the reason why you would include Surtain is if you're a playoff team, you're going to be drafting no sooner than 19. So how do you get from 19 to 2? Well, you could surrender your next 3 years of 1s and 2s, right? Or you'll probably still have to surrender your 1 in 25. But you could probably mitigate that price considerably with Pat Surtain, like Carolina mitigated the price of moving up to get in position to draft Bryce Young by including DJ Moore in that deal with Chicago. And they were only going, I believe, from 9 to 1, right? We're talking 19 to 1. And it may end up being a bridge too far, which is why we may have to have the J.J. McCarthy conversation at some point, too.
Right. And just to note, Kansas City moved up 16 spots. See, the dogs don't like it either.
The dogs would rather have Drake May. Yeah,
it's Friday. They want to get going, right?
Let's find out what J.J. McCarthy is without coaching staff that steals signs, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. That's all part of the mix. All part of the conversation. It's a wrap for today's show. What if? Let us know down in the comments. What do you think? What would happen to your Denver Broncos if they make the postseason? And we'll check it out. Thanks for subscribing here on our YouTube channel. Like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you never miss a vid. He's Mace. Follow him on Twitter and all the socials at Mace Denver. I'm at Cecil Lammy saying thanks for watching. Stay tuned, and would you please stay frosty.